Everyone tells you a grandparent's job is the easy part. The spoiling, the birthday gifts, the handing the hard parenting decisions back to your own kids. Nobody tells you what to do when a 7-year-old pulls you close at your son's front door and whispers something that undoes every ounce of that ease in a single sentence. My name is Walter Grunwald. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Fenimore Ridge, Wisconsin, in the same clapboard farmhouse I've lived in since I retired from the co-op grain elevator 16 years ago, where I still get up before dawn out of old habit and drink my coffee on the porch, watching the mist burn off the back field, even in winter when it means standing there in a coat thick enough to work cattle in. I used to believe that if something was truly wrong in my son's house, I'd be able to see it from the driveway. I was wrong, and it took 11 words whispered against my ear to show me exactly how wrong. Before I tell you what I found, I want to ask you something small. If you've ever had a child trust you with something too heavy for them to carry alone, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, but it tells me you're still with me, and that matters more than you'd think. Now let me tell you about my daughter-in-law. Her name is Kristen Grunwald, and she married my son Adam 9 years ago. In that time, I thought I'd come to know her well enough. She kept an immaculate kitchen, everything labeled, everything in its place. Mason jars of pantry staples lined up by height on open shelving she'd installed herself. She ran 3 miles most mornings before the kids woke up, rain or shine, and posted about it sometimes on social media, with little captions about discipline and self-care. She was active in the PTA at my granddaughter's elementary school, the kind of parent who volunteered for the fall carnival and remembered every teacher's name. She made a big show of clean eating for the family. Home-pressed juices most mornings in a machine that took up half the counter. Organic produce delivered in a box every Thursday. She had a way of laughing a half-second too late in conversations, like she was calculating the correct response before giving it. I thought I knew this woman well enough to trust her with my granddaughter's daily care. I thought 9 years bought you that. The Saturday it happened was about as ordinary as they come. I'd picked up a wrapped gift from the hardware store in town, a junior tool set for my granddaughter Ivy, who just turned 7 and had taken a sudden interest in helping me fix things whenever she visited, and drove the 40 minutes out to Adam and Kristen's place on the edge of Hartwell, the small town where Adam had settled after college. Nothing about that drive suggested anything was coming. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? The disaster never announces itself on the drive over. It waits for you at the front door. Adam answered, gave me a hug, told me Kristen was upstairs, getting their younger son down for a nap, and that Ivy was in the backyard. I found her on the swing set, dragging her sneakers through the dirt beneath it, and when she saw me, she ran over and hugged my legs the way she always had, since she was small enough to fit both arms around one of them. I handed her the gift, watched her tear into the wrapping paper with the kind of enthusiasm only a 7-year-old can bring to a toy screwdriver set, and then, as I knelt down to help her figure out which piece went where, she leaned in close, put her small hand against my ear, the way kids do when they think they're being very quiet, and whispered, "Grandpa, can you ask Mom to stop putting things in my juice?" I went very still. I asked her, keeping my voice as light and easy as I could manage, what she meant by that. She shrugged, the way kids do when a thing feels normal enough to them that they don't understand why an adult's face just changed. She put stuff in it from a little bottle. She says it's vitamins, but it makes my tummy hurt, and I get really sleepy at school, and Mrs. Danforth had to call Mom last week because I fell asleep during reading time. She said it all so matter-of-factly, like she was describing the weather, and that was somehow the part that frightened me most. Here's something nobody tells you about the moment a child trusts you with something like this. You don't get the luxury of deciding whether to believe them. You simply have to move, carefully, immediately, in whatever direction protects them fastest, and sort out the disbelief later, if it turns out there's room for any at all. I didn't say anything to Kristen that afternoon. I didn't want to give her a single minute of warning before I understood what I was actually dealing with. I finished the visit as normally as I could manage, my hands not quite steady, as I helped Ivy assemble her little toolbox, and on the drive home, I called my daughter, Renata, a pediatric nurse 2 counties over, and told her exactly what Ivy had said. Renata went quiet for a long moment on the phone, the kind of quiet that told me she was taking this far more seriously than I might have hoped she wouldn't. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully, she said. You cannot confront Kristen directly on the strength of one comment from a 7-year-old, even if every instinct in you says to. If something really is going on, the first thing that happens the moment she knows you suspect her is that whatever evidence exists disappears, and Ivy ends up more isolated, not less. You need to get Ivy seen by a doctor, quietly, under a reason that doesn't tip anyone off, and let a professional tell you what's actually going on in her body. I asked her how in the world I was supposed to arrange that without Kristen finding out immediately. Adam, Renata said. You call Adam, not Kristen. Tell him you're worried about Ivy falling asleep at school, that a teacher called home, and ask if you two can take her in together, just as a precaution. He's her father. He has every right to take her to a doctor without it looking like an accusation. I called my son that same evening, and I want to be honest with you. It was one of the hardest phone calls of my life, choosing my words carefully enough to plant real concern without revealing the full weight of what Ivy had told me, because I understood, even in that moment, that if I said too much too soon, Adam's first instinct would be to defend his wife, not investigate her, and I needed him thinking clearly, not defensively. Dad, Kristen's really careful about that kind of thing, Adam told me, and I could hear the reflexive loyalty in his voice, the kind any decent husband carries for his wife. She's big on vitamins and supplements. She probably just doesn't think to mention it, because it's routine to her. Humor an old man, I said. Take her in. Ask them to run a basic panel. If it's nothing, and we've lost an afternoon. But something about the way she said it stuck with me, son. Adam agreed. Mostly, I think, to put my mind at ease, rather than out of any real worry of his own. And 2 days later, he took Ivy to see her pediatrician, Dr. An Pham, at a clinic just outside Hartwell, using the school nap incident as the stated reason for the visit. Here's something nobody tells you about waiting on test results for a child you love. The hours stretch in a way that makes ordinary time feel like it's playing some kind of cruel trick on you. I sat by my phone for 2 full days, coffee going cold in my hand more than once, replaying Ivy's small voice against my ear. She put stuff in it from a little bottle, over and over, until the words started to lose their shape. Adam called me on the 3rd afternoon, and I could hear something different in his voice the moment he said hello. Not panic yet, but the flat, careful tone of someone bracing for panic that hadn't quite arrived. Dad, Dr. Pham wants to talk to both of us, together. She said it's better in person. We met at the clinic the next morning, Adam pale and quiet beside me in the waiting room, and Dr. Pham brought us into her office rather than an exam room, which told me before she said a single word that whatever she'd found, she considered it serious enough to need privacy and time. Ivy's basic blood work came back with elevated levels of a sedative compound, consistent with over-the-counter antihistamine medication, at a concentration significantly higher than what would be expected from an accidental single dose, Dr. Pham said, choosing each word with visible care. Given the pattern you've described, daytime drowsiness, stomach upset, an incident falling asleep in class, combined with these levels, I'm required by law to report this as a suspected case of medication being administered inappropriately to a minor. Adam's face went white. Are you saying someone's been drugging my daughter? I'm saying the blood work is consistent with repeated, low-dose administration of a sedating medication over what looks like a period of weeks, possibly longer, Dr. Pham said. I can't tell you who administered it. That's not something blood work can answer. But I can tell you, this wasn't a one-time accident. And I can tell you, it needs to be looked into immediately, by people with the authority to do so. The doctor went silent for a moment after that, letting the weight of what she'd just said settle into the room, and I remember watching my son's hands, folded tightly in his lap, go white at the knuckles. Here's something nobody tells you about the moment a child you love becomes the subject of a formal investigation into her own safety. The fear doesn't come in one wave. It comes in layers, each one worse than the last, because you keep hoping the next piece of information will somehow soften what you already know, and it never does. Dr. Pham was required to file a report with the county's Child Protective Services Division, and within 24 hours, a caseworker named Diane Okafor called Adam to schedule a home visit and a formal interview with Ivy. conducted separately from either parent, per standard protocol. Adam, to his credit, didn't try to fight the process or protect Kristen from it once the medical evidence was laid out in front of him. But I watched something break in him over those first 2 days. The particular grief of a man realizing the person he trusted with his children might have been hurting one of them in his own house, under his own roof, while he was at work believing everything was fine. I did not confront Kristen. I did not drive back out to that house and demand answers across her own kitchen island. I understood, the same way Renata had warned me from the start, that the moment Kristen realized we knew, any remaining physical evidence, the small bottle Ivy had described, whatever medication it actually contained, would disappear within the hour, and we needed that evidence far more than we needed the temporary satisfaction of confronting her ourselves. Instead, at Diane Okafor's guidance, Adam agreed to something that made my stomach turn even as I understood why it mattered. He continued living in that house, behaving as normally as he could manage, while CPS coordinated with local police to build a proper case. Diane explained it to us plainly in a follow-up call. Right now, Kristen has no idea anyone suspects her of anything. That's actually the best position we could be in. If we move too fast, without documentation, this becomes a he said, she said situation that's very hard to prove in court, even with the blood work. If we move carefully, we have a real chance of understanding exactly what's been happening and stopping it for good. So for the better part of 2 weeks, my son performed a marriage he no longer trusted, sitting across from Kristen at dinner, watching her home-pressed juice each morning in that expensive machine, watching her measure something from a small amber dropper bottle into Ivy's glass, with the same practiced, unbothered efficiency she brought to everything else in that kitchen, while Adam, coached carefully by Diane on exactly what he could and couldn't legally do without a warrant, quietly photographed the bottle's label with his phone the first chance he got when Kristen stepped out to take Ivy's younger brother upstairs. The label read, in small print, a common over-the-counter children's allergy medication, the kind found in nearly every parent's medicine cabinet, the kind that, at recommended doses, is perfectly safe, and at repeated, elevated doses, causes exactly the pattern of drowsiness, stomach upset, and lethargy that had sent Ivy to sleep at her desk during reading time. If you've been with me a while, you already know I don't move on anger alone, especially not with a child's safety hanging in the balance. Before I tell you what came next, understand this. The people capable of quietly medicating their own child are rarely doing it out of cruelty, in the way most of us imagine cruelty. Often, and this doesn't excuse it, it comes from something the investigators call medical child abuse, sometimes tied to a need for attention, sympathy, or control, dressed up as devoted parenting. And the only way to stop it cleanly is to understand the full pattern before you ever confront the person doing it. Diane brought in a specialist, a forensic pediatrician named Dr. Osei, who'd handled cases like this before, and over the course of the investigation's second week, a picture began forming that none of us had expected. School records showed Ivy had missed 11 days in the past school year for various vague ailments, stomach aches, headaches, dizziness, each excused by a note from Kristen, none ever substantiated by an actual doctor's visit until now. A pharmacy records request, obtained through the investigation, showed Kristen had purchased the same allergy medication at 4 different pharmacies across 2 counties over the past several months, far more than any household would reasonably need, spaced out in a pattern that looked, to Dr. Osei's trained eye, deliberately designed to avoid drawing attention from any single pharmacist. This is a recognized pattern, Dr. Osei told Adam and me during a case review meeting, laying the records out much the way Rosalind Byrne once laid out bank statements in a story I'd hear about much later from a stranger named Thomas. A child with vague, hard-to-verify symptoms. A parent who's unusually present, unusually devoted, unusually knowledgeable about the medical details when doctors ask questions. Frequent medical visits or frequent absences that never quite reveal a real diagnosis. And now, direct toxicology evidence. I want to be careful not to jump ahead of what we can prove, but this fits a pattern we take extremely seriously. I sat in that meeting and thought about every social media post Kristen had ever made about Ivy's sensitive stomach. every sympathetic comment from friends and family, every casserole delivered by a concerned neighbor after Kristen mentioned Ivy having another rough week. And I felt something in my chest go cold and very still, understanding for the first time that the sympathy Kristen had been collecting for years might not have been an accidental byproduct of a struggling child. It might have been the entire point. I want to be honest about what those 2 weeks cost my son. Watching him sit across from his own wife at dinner, laughing at things that weren't funny, kissing her goodnight, all while carrying the knowledge of what Dr. Pham's blood work had shown, took something out of him I don't think fully came back, even after everything that followed. He stopped sleeping properly. He started finding excuses to be the one who packed Ivy's lunch and prepared her breakfast juice himself, quietly swapping it for a store-bought carton he kept hidden in the garage refrigerator, telling Kristen he was trying to cut down on kitchen mess in the mornings, when she asked why the juicer had gone quiet. I drove out twice during that stretch, ostensibly just to visit, bringing Ivy small things from town, sitting with her on the porch steps while she told me, in her easy, unguarded 7-year-old way, about school and her friends, and a butterfly she'd caught in a jar and released. I never once let her see how carefully I was watching her color, her energy, whether her eyes tracked normally, whether the heaviness Renata had described to me as a symptom to watch for was present or absent on any given day. Some days she seemed perfectly fine. Other days, I noticed a slowness in her that made my stomach tighten in a way I hope I never have to feel again. On day 15, Diane Okafor called Adam with an update that moved everything forward faster than any of us had expected. A second amber dropper bottle, different from the one photographed earlier, had been recovered from Kristen's car during what she believed was a routine vehicle inspection tied to an unrelated fender bender claim. A bottle containing a concentration and formulation that didn't match any legitimate over-the-counter product on the market, one that toxicology would need several more days to fully identify. We have enough now to move forward with both the criminal referral and an emergency custody filing, Diane told Adam over the phone, with me sitting beside him at his kitchen table, both of us listening on speaker with the volume turned low. But Adam, I need you to understand what happens next moves fast, and it happens today. Officers are going to arrive at your home this afternoon with a search warrant. I need you to keep Kristen there. Keep things as normal as you can manage until they arrive. Adam's hand, resting flat on the kitchen table between us, was shaking slightly, and I reached over and put mine over it the way I used to when he was small and afraid of a thunderstorm, and I told him the only thing I could think to say. You did this exactly right, son. You listened to your daughter. If this story has meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you hit subscribe before we go on. It helps keep stories like this one going, and it means more than you'd know to feel like there are people on the other side of this screen who understand why a whispered sentence from a 7-year-old was enough to change everything. That afternoon, I sat in my truck, 2 houses down from Adam and Kristen's place, the way I'd once imagined only strangers in stories did, watching for headlights that weren't mine to be waiting for. Around 3:15, 2 unmarked sedans and a marked patrol unit turned onto the street, moving without lights or sirens, exactly as Diane had promised, pulling into the driveway with the quiet, deliberate calm of people who had done this before and understood exactly how much depended on doing it right. I watched Adam open the front door before they could knock, watched him say something brief to the lead detective, watched Kristen appear behind him in the doorway, her expression shifting in real time from confusion to something colder and more calculating. The same recalculating look I'd later learn other people in other houses wore in exactly this kind of moment. And then, faintly, carried on the afternoon air across 2 front lawns, I heard my granddaughter's voice from somewhere inside the house, bright and unaware of everything happening around her, asking her father a question about her butterfly jar, completely untouched by the machinery now finally moving to protect her. My phone buzzed in my hand, a text from Adam, sent from just inside his own front door, while a search warrant was being read aloud behind him. Dad, she just asked me why there are police cars outside. I don't know what to tell her yet.